and potatoes. Not just a deep dive, it's the deepest dive into Minnesota Vikings football.
That is absolutely correct. There is no deeper dive into the Vikings than this very show, Purple Daily Meat and Potatoes. It's Judd, it is AJ, and it is Tyler Forness, who, of course, does an outstanding job breaking down the film and is on top of what the Vikings are doing really schematically and how things look on the field. And Forno, let's just start there. They didn't look good on Monday night against the Rams. 14-win team, last two games a disaster. Give me your thoughts on any issues that you probably saw throughout the course of the season and how those issues manifested themselves in the last two games and especially Monday in Arizona.
Yeah, it's a really tough way to kind of finish the season like this, especially for someone like Sam Darnold, who really had a renaissance year. But I think some of the issues that we had kind of came home to roost all at the same time. And some of it is just the play style of Sam Darnold, and it worked so well all year. He led the league in most completions with on balls that traveled over 20 yards, also the most yards per attempt, and touchdowns in the National Football League. This team was designed to find shot plays, and when they weren't there, it was a little bit of a struggle. And I think some of the issues with Kevin O'Connell's kind of play calling paired with Sam Darnold, they just couldn't adjust and do a lot of quick games. Some of the quick game stuff just didn't work. Sam Darnold missed a couple of screens just badly. Like, there was a little bit of an attempt to adjust, but when you have Darnold and that mindset of how he's trying to attack you down the field, and all of a sudden, hey, it's not working. Like, all of the sacks on Sam Darnold came after 3.2 seconds. Sam Darnold's average time to throw this year was over 3 seconds, third highest in the National Football League. Some of that is due to the shot plays. Some of that is due to Darnold holding the ball too long. But it's because of that, like, uniform desire of O'Connell wanting to find those shot plays and Darnold also wanting to attack them, that it just kind of all crushed them. And then you have the offensive line having a poor performance. Look, they did not.
Age, I believe that. Someone froze the picture. He froze the show.
Unbelievable. Yeah, and I don't blame him and his computer for overworking, because watching that O-line work on Monday night was
back.
It froze my brain as well for now.
Yeah, it's the O-line. I don't know how much of that you guys caught, but they didn't really miss Christian Darrisaw that much. They missed him completely. And one thing I found kind of doing my own research, trying to figure out kind of the holes in this offensive line. Blake Brandel was really good when he was next to Christian Darrisaw. 6 pressures in the first 6 games when Darrisaw played complete games. 4 pressures in the game where he got hurt. And then from then on, he had 31 pressures. I can't remember what he had in the wild card game, so that's not included in that. If you have a great tackle, you can survive with average-ish guard play. And the Vikings were able to kind of ride that all year. But with this Rams defensive line, they're so powerful and they're able to do a lot of these stunts. And they got home. 8 of the 9 sacks were 4 rushers. I believe the only one that wasn't was the Ahkello Witherspoon strip sack, because he wasn't even supposed to be rushing. He was in coverage. He saw TJ Hawkinson kind of slip by and start to go vertical. So he saw Darnold and he attacked. And that was just a really heads up play by him. But they just crippled this Vikings team with all these different stunts and stuff. Some of it was a lot of the Aaron Glenn-esque type stuff. And the talent gap was just way too evident, and it was way too obvious. And Kevin O'Connell even mentioned after the game, we have to bulk up the interior of that offensive line. I've seen people call for like Garrett Bradbury. I think Bradbury is the least of their concerns. Bradbury is fine. If you improve both guard spots, you can be fine with Bradbury at center. Like he has his flaws. He's not perfect, but he's not bad. And especially for the price that you have him at, $5.25 million average annual value is an incredible deal for a quality starting center, which he is. I mean, he's not top 10, but he's easily top 20, probably around average. And this year they had to find ways to win in the margins, Judd. They had to find it because they had $72 million at the end of the year in dead salary cap. You have to find ways to moneyball. You have to find spots where you're going to take chances. So what did they do? They decided to take chances on the interior of that offensive line. They decided to, hey, We are going to see if Ed Ingram can take that next step and develop, because a lot of guys take that step in year 3. Smart call. Did it work? No. They decided to take Blake Brandel, who they've been developing since 2020 when he was a 6th-round pick as a left tackle. They moved him inside to kind of mitigate some of those athleticism and arm length concerns. And it worked out for the most part. Were there struggles? Yeah. First year starting at guard. Okay. But you had to find a way to take some of those chances because you had a void of money. So they decided to take it here. Now, is Kwesi Adofo-Mensah going to want to still moneyball the interior of the offensive line? Kevin O'Connell doesn't want to. He told us that after the game. And I think how they continue to build this team with some of these talent gaps is going to be interesting, because now Kwesi has a clean slate. How is he going to use that clean slate? Because we've seen a lot of different ways to attack, a lot of different ways to try and prioritize fixing some of these things, but he had a limited budget.
So
Now,
let me ask you this, Forno. Based on that, if you're fine with Garrett Bradbury coming back and you're saying that, like, it kind of depends on the guys next to him, what's your prototypical replacement to upgrade there? Is it somebody that's better at pass block compared to run block? We know one of the complaints that we've seen and talked about all season long is that Kevin O'Connell will sometimes lean on being a little too pass happy at times. Is it because he maybe doesn't have that confidence in the O-line, or he just naturally is a pass happy coach who's going to call those types of plays? What's the prototypical guy who's going to come in and help bolster that interior O-line?
Be good. I'm not going to really blow smoke and say it has to be a great pass blocker or a great run blocker. Just be a good football player. Be somebody who I can trust to do a little bit of everything. Like, you can trust Christian Darrisaw to do everything. You can trust Brian O'Neill to do everything. I want a guy who's well-rounded. I want a guy who's not going to be a disaster, who can pick up stunts, who's a good communicator. I'm just going to say it. The Dalton Reisner experiment was a failure. He stinks. I want him gone. I still don't think it was a good idea to put him in over Ed Ingram. I understand why, but the offensive line started to really go down fast when Ingram left. And I do believe that you need to replace both guard spots, or at the very least, Brandel needs competition, because you're going to have Darrisaw back next year. Maybe Darrisaw is just the key to unlocking Brandel from a communication standpoint and from just having a comfortability. Like, I wonder how much Brandel, just because Cam Robinson kept getting beat inside, how much that was just in his head, where Darrisaw doesn't have to worry about that. And I think some of those can be factors, but Trey Smith's going to be the obvious target. Can the Chiefs afford to let him go? I really don't know that answer, but I also don't think they can afford to keep him. But they've done crazier things. They've got Mahomes on this wonky contract. They've got Kelsey on a relatively team-friendly-ish deal. Chris Jones is now going to make over $30 million a year. It's going to be really interesting to see how they mitigate that, but they have to figure out a way to find consistency and cohesiveness on the offensive line. They just didn't have it this year.
At the end of the day, who is Sam Darnold?
Sam Darnold is a very good quarterback that is going to have some volatility to him. And I said this on the postgame show on Vikings First and Skol on Monday night. Take 48 hours and let everything sink in, and don't overreact to any one singular performance. I do think that you need to weigh a little heavily on the final 2 performances from Sam Darnold, because they were the 2 biggest games. But we can't forget that he obliterated the Packers, torched them. And that was a good football team. And by some metrics, they were considered a better football team than the Minnesota Vikings. So I think Darnold is a guy that he's going to chase shot plays. He's going to make good decisions. Procedurally, a lot of the process stuff he's used all year was really good. But sometimes he holds onto the ball too long because he just wants that shot play. And I think if you can harness that ability, you don't want to tell him to stop. Because if you tell him to stop, you're going to take away a lot of what's good about him. But the understanding of learning to take the check down, that was something that guys like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, it took a while for them to figure out, because they're aliens. But you don't want your alien quarterback to always be an alien. You want them to play within the structure of an offense, because it will help you move the chains. And then when they have to be an alien, that's what separates them. But you still have to play within structure. You still have to play within rhythm. And Kurt Warner pounding the table for it. He's right. In structure, play is more important than everything else. You have to play well within structure. And I think Darnold needs to be a little bit more comfortable taking 5 yards, 10 yards. And O'Connell said in his press conference, completions are negative for the defense. You want to keep making them, because if you keep making them, you're going to keep making plays. You're going to keep moving the football. So I think you need to harness what he's able to do. And I do think if the Vikings choose to keep him for one more year, I don't necessarily think it's a mistake, but you have to look at everything as a big picture. And are you comfortable with Darnold, what you saw the last 2 games and what you saw the entire season, and that you can grow that? Because you're going to want to see development. You're going to want to see growth, especially if you're going to commit a big portion of your salary cap to him. You have to be comfortable with that. I trust Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah to make the right decision, whatever that decision is. The thing is, you just got to be right. Got to make the right call.
And maybe I'll pose this question to both you guys here, but do you feel like you mentioned maybe wanting to bring him back for one more year? Do you think that those final 2 games are enough? Because I think leading up to that point, it seemed monetary wise, if the Vikings want to do anything, like there was a real discussion of, okay, Darnold or JJ McCarthy. Was it like heavily weighted on one side? Arguably, yes. But now with those final 2 games kind of in place, I think everybody's assuming JJ McCarthy probably more than likely is the future starting quarterback of this team starting in 2025. But you're talking about bringing him back. One, do you think that Sam Darnold would regress and accept a backup role based on those last 2 games? Do you think that his value now is driven too high? Is there any real possibility that they can afford to keep him on a 1-year type of deal when he maybe will feel like, I've already proved in 14 other games that I can be a guy for a certain other team? I don't know how you guys maybe feel about that.
I'll let Judd go first on this one.
I think he's probably going to sign elsewhere, and I think he's probably going to get like a 3-year contract that's going to be for more than the Vikings want to pay. I don't think I'm putting him now on a franchise tag, which would be approximately $40 million. But he has to be very careful, as I've been saying for months, where he goes. Because if he goes to the wrong place, if he goes to a place where they're like, Sam, you won 14 games, you are now a complete quarterback, and they don't give him the correct infrastructure, I think he's benched. So he's got to be very careful. But I think the Vikings, I think if there was any question about the plans to move on to McCarthy previously, those have been cleared up. Just look at KOC's looks on the sidelines the last 2 games. And by the way, I'm not absolving him completely. There's been way too much absolution of none of this is his fault. It's all Darnold's fault. Well, you can't take credit for 14 games and then peace out on the terrible games. But I think that I think they've found their quarterback. I don't think it's Sam. I think what Sam did was great, but my guess is he goes elsewhere and signs and hopefully has success for his sake.
I haven't personally decided what I want the ideal path to be. The ideal path, like in a hypothetical manner, is JJ McCarthy just plays like Sam Darnold next year. And you get that kind of quarterback performance on like $5 million in salary cap space.
Yeah.
The one thing that I struggle with is what Sam Darnold did the majority of the year is what you want JJ McCarthy to be. You have it already. So are you going to be willing to get rid of that, even if it costs you a lot of money? That is a question that you have to ask yourself, that inside the building, they have to determine how much of the Sam Darnold struggles were really on him. How much of it was everything surrounding him? How much was the defensive success? How much was the offensive line's poor ability? How much of it was the receivers not doing enough? It was like that 4th down play that failed. Justin Jefferson falls down. Like, you can't fall down. That's like just a quick game thing. That would have been wide open, and they would have hit it, and they would have been able to continue the drive. So how much of this are you going to put on Darnold? Right now, I would probably put around 50 to 60% on him, but there's still a huge chunk of pie that goes to other places. So that's why I said wait 48 hours and then take as much emotion as you can out of it and try to look at the whole picture. Right now, JJ McCarthy is just an idea. Mm-hmm. He is not a sure thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that I think a lot of people are taking, are just not thinking about right now, because you believe JJ McCarthy is going to be good. The organization has told you they believe he's a franchise quarterback. You saw one preseason game, but you've never seen him take a regular season snap. You've never seen him play with the first team in this offense other than a few plays in training camp practice. He is an idea. And the idea is that he could be really good. But there's a chance he's not. And there's a chance that Darnold just continues to be really good. So there are a lot of interesting factors at play here other than the ideal situation is you just pay a quarterback $5 million. You build the rest of the team around him. But if the quarterback is bad, it doesn't matter how small the quarterback's salary cap hit is.
If you think your idea was bad, then you should all be fired. This is the first top 10 pick in franchise history for that position. So they need to go along and they need to be right. Here's what I want. I want McCarthy to start because the pressure ramps up and they should have pressure. If they go back with, and the thing with Darnold too is this really him? Was the last 2 games more him? This is a guy who was drafted 3rd overall in 2018 and was a flop, and we can all talk about why. And yes, Kevin O'Connell helped him quite a bit. But are you sure those 14 games are him? And when you don't trust him to do certain things, like if you have to drive the ball, if the only way that you really think, okay, he's got a big arm, and I think he is incredibly, and I've said this 1,000 times, athletically talented. Do I think that he is a cerebral quarterback in any way, shape, or form? 0. No, I don't. So if you think McCarthy is, the idea of J.J. McCarthy, and by the way, I have no problem saying this, you better have been right. Mm-hmm. So if you're watching film of Sam right now and you're like, yeah, boy, he was pretty good, and McCarthy's an idea in our mind, then I want to fire you all right now. This is not a 6th round pick.
Let me kind of rephrase the argument, Judd, because I'm not saying that the staff isn't confident. I'm saying you have no tangible proof that he is what you think he is. And because there just isn't. And it's not that I don't think he will be good. I like him. I think he can be really, really good. But I also don't think it's fair to say that he's going to be immediately great in the system because you have no tangible proof. You believe he is, and that belief is fine, but there's too much conversation about it's going to happen. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. You don't know. But with a larger sample size with Darnold, what you have. And that's why I think the franchise tag might be in play more than a long-term deal. It's the 2004 San Diego Chargers. Before Drew Brees became Drew Brees, he was an average journeyman style quarterback after being a 2nd-round pick. 3 years in, nobody knew Drew Brees was good. Not even the Chargers did. They drafted Eli Manning, traded for Phillip Rivers. Then he made the Pro Bowl. And then they had to sit there and decide, okay, what are we going to do? Well, they franchise tagged him, which would have been 16.99% of the cap based on my calculations, trying to get as much information as I could. If the Vikings franchise Sam Darnold, it's going to be about 17.5% of the cap. So era-to-era translations match. If you are still completely unsure about what to do, it may not be the smartest financial decision, but you can franchise take Darnold and give McCarthy another year, give Darnold another year, and just figure it out. Because if there's a whole adage, if you have 2, you have none. But the Vikings may actually have 2. Now, the Chargers didn't know that Brees was going to be a Hall of Famer and Phillip Rivers was a borderline Hall of Famer. And maybe the Vikings have that. Maybe they don't. We have no clue of knowing.
But if the Vikings are, but my point is the Vikings people, Kevin O'Connell's in place to get this right. So if he's like, I don't know, then Kevin O'Connell has no business being here.
I think,
which by the way, to be clear, I think O'Connell has a lot of business being here, and I think he's going to get a very rich extension. And quite frankly, I think he deserves it, despite the fact that, and I don't know why, there's some weird fandom thing there. Kevin O'Connell had 2 bad games. And I keep getting pushback like, oh no, it's all Darnold. No, he's fine. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not suggesting that Kevin O'Connell be fired. I am suggesting that if you look at the last 2 games and you call him a quarterback whisperer, well, then where the hell did the quarterback whisperer go? But I also need them, if they are unsure at all about McCarthy's development or progress. Now, if they think the knee is a problem still, we got a whole different problem.
Yeah.
But if you are like, if you say we need to keep Sam because we're not really, really sure, then bring back Rick Spielman, because that's what Rick did. He questioned himself constantly. These guys either are going to get it right or wrong. And if they get it wrong, their careers are in jeopardy. And if they get it right, well, that is why the Wilfs hired them in the first place.
I'll say this about Darnold, because I think one thing that we as a society kind of do as a whole, and not everybody does this, but everybody does it to an extent, is we try to confirm priors. And we we had this opinion on this and we want to be right. Everybody wants to be right. But when you're presented with new information, how are you going to grow and adapt? If the Vikings choose to roll with Sam Darnold because of the information they have, I think that that's a valid path to take. Now, nobody thought Sam Darnold was going to be this. Not even the Vikings could say they thought he was going to be this, but being able to take advantage of everything around him, I think it's they can replicate that. And I think if you make that decision to try it one more year, I think there's merit to it. I also think there's merit to what you're saying, Judd. You made a decision at 10th overall and you need to kind of roll with it. Right. It's a very complicated situation that requires a lot of nuance, a lot of introspective thought. And I don't think it's as simple as McCarthy picked 10th overall. We have to go with him no matter what next year.
Those last two games, though, and I know that it helps to get some distance from them. Those last two games are jarring. They're not, because they weren't just sort of bad games. You collapsed. You fell apart. You had a lot of people who had a hand in a 17-day period? You went from a 14-win chance to win the conference top seed to peeing down your pant leg. So there is if Darnold had played pretty well, let's just say they lose 2 games. Let's say they're normal games. I mean, Kevin O'Connell, let's keep this is not being talked about enough, but it's a very important nugget. Kevin O'Connell at some point in the second half decided to protect the score. He was protecting this in the fourth quarter. He started to protect the score. He was not allowing, when Joe Buck and Aikman were goofing on the Vikings, because they're down by 18. Right. What are they doing? He is, and O'Connell is well liked, and guilty as charged. I like the guy a lot. I think he's a good guy, comes off as a good human being. I don't know him well, but I mean, I really like him. But let's just reverse this for a second. Let's just say for a second, and this team is not as popular, but let's say for one moment that the exact same situation unfolded, but it's PJ Fleck. So he's protecting the score. So he's basically saying, oh boy, if I give the ball up again, we're going to lose worse than we're losing right now. We would have torched him. We would have torched him. So I'm with you, Forno, on allowing time to creep in here to create some division. But I also think that the difference between 14 games and the last 2 is when you put on the last 2, they're a horror movie. They are Saw 3 and 4. They are as gruesome as you can possibly get. That's different than, hey, you know what? We played hard and just lost. No, you collapsed. And at the end of the day, you had a coach who basically said, no mas. I mean, it was the Roberto Duran fight. No mas, no mas. I am going to wave the white flag and I'm going to protect, because 27-9, I think far closer than what that game felt like.
The Roberto Duran pull. Well done, Judd. Well done. It was a
Roberto Duran. Like O'Connell's no mas. No mas. I don't want, Sean McVay, don't score anymore. We won't score. You don't score. 27-9 looks respectable.
Yeah, doing it with 7.5 minutes left, I thought was just wild. So
did Aikman and Buck.
Yeah. One of the things that I was kind of thinking about in real time, because my wife and I were watching the game, she's like, why are they running the football? And I'm like, I think Kevin O'Connell just realized this game is over and he just wants to protect his players. And
yeah,
I didn't really agree with that, because there's 7.5 minutes left. There's 3 and you're down 3 scores. Okay.
Right.
I get it. That's where if you have a rookie quarterback who's healthy, get him in the game, get him some playoff snaps. Okay. Let's see what happens. But I thought it was way too early. I thought O'Connell did not adapt enough of his game plan. And I thought Flores didn't either. Flores basically ran out the same game plan it looked like that he ran out in week 8.
We haven't talked about this. Yes.
Oh, what are you doing, dude?
Yes.
It didn't work the first time. Why is it going to work the second time?
This is being ignored way too much. I love this point, Forno.
And the biggest thing with the Rams is they had really calculated blitzes, but they got home with 4. You get home with 4, nothing else matters, because all of a sudden you have 7 in coverage, and it's a lot harder to throw against 7. The Vikings, people are going to talk about blitz rate. One thing I want people to understand about the Vikings blitz rate, their base rush is 5 guys. whether we like it or not. 5 guys to the Vikings is not a blitz. That is how they live. That is how they like to rush the passer. So if they send 6, that is considered a blitz for the Vikings. If they send 7, that is a blitz. Rushing 5, that's just their norm. And we can look back all year. That's just how they like to run. That's what they want to do. So they should have tried 4. They should have done a little bit more of that. But I think this is where the talent gap conversation comes into play to kind of go all the way around the world. They don't have anybody they can trust to rush up the middle. They don't. And I think because of that, that's where you have issues in just being able to send 4 guys. Who's your D tackle? Jihad Ward. Ward played very well this year. He is not a traditional D tackle. Pat Jones, not having him the last 2 games, I think hurt more than we realized because of how physical he is and how he crashes and disrupts things on the interior. But also these stunts that they're running take like 3.5, 4 seconds. Stafford is throwing the ball in like 2.1.
Right.
You have to be able to adapt what you're doing. Guess what? If it's not working, send 3 and do a bunch of cover 0 looks and drop 8. Like there has to be a different path than just doing the same stuff you were doing in week 8. And I think it was a coaching malpractice by both O'Connell and Flores for not being willing to adapt and adjust and not having any kind of really shift in philosophy or adjustments that were enough to be able to make a difference, because that's what they're there for. It's their scheme, but you got to be able to adapt and adjust. And they just didn't do enough of it in those last 2 games. That's why I'm not willing to come close to putting it all on Darnold. Like around 50%, I think is fair.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, like in the Lions game, I kind of give Darnold a little bit of a break because, yes, he missed a bunch of throws, but his process was good mostly, and he was finding the right guys. He missed Addison on those 2, but then he found Jefferson wide open on one of them. He just missed. He threw it to Addison when Addison was in an okay-ish spot. They should have had multiple touchdowns. And if you just hit 4 passes and maybe the Andrew Van Ginkel interception happens, all of a sudden the Vikings could have 35 points. Like, it wasn't that far off where the Vikings could have easily had a high score in that game.
They could have won that game, yes.
They could have won that game if they would have executed the way they had all season. And we're not asking them to do anything other than what they're good at, what they've shown that they can do. This game, I thought, was a failure from the top down. And the talent gap, the talent voids in certain spots, not being willing to trust your cornerbacks to play man coverage, not having anybody on the interior who can generate any form of consistent pressure, always asking these guys to do like 3-second loop stunts. It just all manifested at the same time, and it killed us.
Age, go ahead.
Yeah, since we're still kind of on the coaching topic here with both KOC and now Brian Flores being brought up. Over the past 2 weeks, I mean, it's been a lot of red flags, I think, have been popping up. You've been able to see them a little more clear than earlier in the season. Each of you give me like 1 or 2 glaring, blazing red flags from either KOC, Brian Flores, like the leniency to always blitz, bring 5, or KOC, like not being able to work in some shorter routes for Sam Darnold. What's the one thing you need to see fixed absolutely come kickoff week 1, 2025?
Talent. I need more talent. I need better players in certain spots. I need corners I can trust in man coverage. I need some kind of penetrator on the interior of that defensive line. Some of these things were not addressed enough in the offseason because they had no money. They decided to fix edge rusher. And guess what? They did. They added a 3-down linebacker. All of those massive hits. Like, we can say, oh, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. But they were so good at what they did. It's hard to say that they were wrong. They just knew that they couldn't do everything. And I think the 2022 draft is one of the things that taught Kwesi that. You can't fix everything. Fix what you can and fix it well. Edge rusher is set. I think Dallas Turner isn't an issue at all. I wrote about it for A to Z Sports this morning. Like, he is showing a lot, but are you really going to put Andrew Van Ginkel or Jonathan Grenard on the bench so you can play Dallas Turner more? No. The Grenard was almost an all-pro. Andrew Van Ginkel was a second-team all-pro, and both of them are starters in the Pro Bowl.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to bench those guys because Turner plays Van Ginkel's role. Like, now you have to fix other spots. And because edge rusher is set, you don't have to worry about it. You're good. Now you have to worry about safety, corner, offensive line, and running back. Those are going to be your they're high priorities.
And that's the thing. So I guess from my aspect to take offense, and we talked about this, interior line for sure. But more importantly than just saying interior line, yes, running back and a running game that can be relied upon. I'll tell you where things went pear-shaped, because the Vikings had, and this paid off early in the season and certainly dissipated in the playoffs to the point of where it was gone. But if you guys recall, one of the themes of training camp was Kevin O'Connell wanted to run a tougher camp. Now it's 2024, so it's not two-a-days. You can't do those. It's not, practicing in full pads on day one. You can't do that, okay? But he definitely ran for him a tougher camp than his first two. And part of it was because he knows that teams like Philadelphia, San Francisco, heck, the Rams run tougher camps because when the playoffs come, they are prepared to play physical football. And I felt like the Vikings got off to a pretty good start there. The San Francisco game being Exhibit A, which they won at US Bank Stadium. But the reality is this, and Aaron Jones was great in the room. He was an upgrade, no question about it. But the Packers didn't dump him or try to cut his pay again because they don't like him. They did it because the injuries with him, because he's a slight guy who plays a very physical game, always add up. You need to have more, quite frankly, to use the title of the show, meat and potatoes approach when the playoffs come. And the Vikings just simply didn't and couldn't, which, by the way, also is play calling. Like, the lack of a screen game, it felt like they started off with more of a screen game, and then that sort of went by the wayside. I don't have the statistical evidence to back it up. It's just eye test. But there are just, when you watch Philadelphia play, watch the Rams play. Heck, go back and watch San Fran play. When they're in the playoffs, look at the play style. And offensively, the Vikings really still don't have that. And I don't care who your quarterback is, if his name's Darnold, McCarthy, or Tarkington. In 2025, you need that play style. So I think it's philosophy and personnel, but I agree with Forno. I also think in their defense that what they had to spend in March of 2024, they did a really good job there.
Yeah. And really to kind of wrap up the whole point, out of the issues when it comes to coaching and play calling is, well, they don't have the talent to do everything that they want to do. And I think that's part of it. Now, could they still try it and kind of see how it'll manifest? I think an argument, but there's so many nuances here that it's not just one thing. It's a bunch of things, and it came to a cataclysmic end Monday night.
It did indeed. Speaking of our show here, Meat and Potatoes, I want to tell you about the ultimate place to get some great meat and potatoes and much more, and that is from The Butcher and the Boar, my friends, located in the North Loop, a gathering space for Southern-style hospitality. Happy hour, 4 to 6 p.m. every day. And I want to tell you about the newest offering, which is the Judd Special. That's right. Ask for the Judd Special. A beer, a brat, and a shot for $15. We're talking about a huge homemade beer brat with sauerkraut and mustard. Any draft beer, any rail shot, $15. Just ask for the Judd Special. Tell them that you watch Meat and Potatoes and that now you want something of substance at the Butcher and the Boar located in the North Loop. AJ, let's get to the questions for Forno.
Yeah, first one here comes from Ian J 3785 on YouTube. He comments, how did Minnesota not change their game after the Detroit loss? Long routes, 5 and 7 step dropbacks. LA watched the film. No adjustments, was crazy. So Fornall phrased that into, do you feel like KOC was handcuffed a bit this year because it's known that Darnold struggles a bit more with the shorter passes, the shorter routes, screen passes, or was it just a massive blunder in play calling by Kevin O'Connell in the most important part of the season?
I think you can say it's a combination. Like, this is how the Vikings have lived. This is how you maximize Sam Darnold. You take shots. And to say that, just because the Lions had good success against it doesn't mean that the Rams are going to immediately. The first Rams game, they were pretty good. Darnold had a good game. And it did not end the way anybody wanted it to, but it wasn't that Darnold played bad. I think there should have been, and I don't know why there wasn't, because there could be a million reasons why. There should have been more adaptation for some shorter passes. There should have been some more additions to the screen game. They should have had stuff in the holster ready to go. But look, just when it works for 14 games and 14 wins and he's just crushing teams by throwing down the field, you don't all of a sudden say, hey, I'm just not going to do any of that anymore because one team had a lot of success. You have to be able to kind of mitigate some of that. You have to have a balancing act. You can't just get rid of what Darnold's good at. I think they didn't do enough to help out Darnold. The offensive line crushed him, and he wasn't able to maneuver in the pocket. Troy Aikman said Darnold loves to run. No, he doesn't. He wants to move up and around in the pocket, but a lot of those pockets were collapsing in a way where he couldn't move. And then when he did have an opportunity to move, he thrived. So I think it's a lot of different factors. I think KOC needs to self-scout himself a lot this offseason, take a look at where things did go wrong, how you can adapt and adjust. But I don't think it's as simple as like saying, hey, the Lions beat them and then the Rams did too. Like, I think that's a little too simplistic. But look, the deep shots worked all year. You're not just going to completely go away from something that's worked for you consistently. They should have still done more.
Next one comes from Braden May on YouTube as well. He says, we need to address the interior line. It's been almost my whole football life watching us do patchwork with our own line, and I am sick of it. I know we've already kind of touched on this earlier, and I know you mentioned Trey Smith as an option that they should go after as like top of their list. If the Chiefs can somehow keep him, do you have a backup plan to him, or who is like the first person on that interior O-line that you're saying, look, have fun. The door is right there. We're getting somebody else in here.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm going to pull up the different guard options right now.
Okay.
There's not a lot. A lot of the guys that are at the top of the list are potential retirement candidates. Zach Martin, Brandon Scherf, who I'm going to be honest, I think Scherf is cooked. Kevin Zeitler, he's 35 years old. So is Zach Martin. Scherf's 34. James Daniels from the Steelers is 28. Like, that's an option. There aren't a ton of good offensive linemen. So that also plays a factor here. Like, when a good one comes around, you got to find a way to keep them. And I think the Vikings will find a way to improve. I do believe that they just tried to moneyball the interior last year because of their lack of resources, their lack of financial ability to bring in top guys. Top starting guards were getting $20 million a year last year in free agency. Like, are you willing to sacrifice Jonathan Grenard for a guard last year? No, you're not. The guards were fine enough until the end of the season. Now you do need to upgrade the position, but you don't want to give up Grenard, who was a borderline all-pro, just to have a little bit of consistency at that spot. Now you're at a point where you can afford it. Go make it happen. And I do think I'll be interested to see how Kwesi Opamensah prioritizes the interior of that offensive line because of how they did it last year, but with the limited resources. Now that he has the resources, how does he feel about it? What does he want to do? Does he believe $10 million secures it? Or does he need to go after Trey Smith and give him $23 million a year? What does that look like? I'm going to be very intrigued to find that out and kind of see what that looks like. I'm going to look at kind of his mentor, Andrew Berry, and how the Browns have constructed their offensive line. But the difference with the Browns is a lot of those guys are homegrown. It's a lot different paying a homegrown guy versus paying a guy in free agency. Mm-hmm. Homegrown guys, you know a lot more. Homegrown guys you want to reward, and that's a good thing for people in your building to see guys get extensions in the building because it says, hey, your hard work will be rewarded. And the Vikings have had no problem doing that. I do think you need to upgrade it, but how? I'm very intrigued to see what that looks like because there aren't a ton of great options right now, but guys will also get cut. So maybe one of those guys ends up coming here.
Forno, great stuff. We'll be back. We'll have a meat and potatoes to wrap up the season next week. I say that we basically clear the decks and look ahead to the potential additions in free agency in March, Forno. And then also with the Vikings now being locked into the 24th pick in the first round, having a bit more sense of what might be available around that pick. Since a couple of weeks ago, we thought they'd be drafting like 30th or something like that. He's AJ, I'm Judd. He is Forno. This has been Meat and Potatoes.